It was a bitterly cold Christmas Eve in Seattle. Snow was falling heavily outside, the red and white lights of the ambulances casting blurry shadows on the hospital windows. I lay there, motionless on the bed, my stomach twisting in excruciating pain, as if someone were twisting a knife into it. Next to me, my twin sons, Leo and Liam, played quietly with their teddy bears, unaware that their mother was facing emergency surgery and might not wake up. A nurse gently adjusted the heart monitor beside me, while I, with trembling hands, video called my parents in a last-ditch effort. I need help. Surgery tonight. I have no one else to look after Leo and Liam. The image that appeared was my mother, her hair perfectly coiffed, the lights twinkling behind her. My father stood beside me, a glass of wine in his hand, clearly at a fancy party. Mom frowned, frustration clear in her eyes. Rachel, don't make a big deal out of this. Don't you dare tell us to cancel our plans. We already had tickets to see Taylor Swift a month ago. I was stunned. My ears were ringing, the background music echoing through the phone, now a cold knife cutting into every nerve. I tried to stay calm, but my hands clenched the blanket. The physical pain was nothing compared to the chill from my own family. Mom, I'm going into surgery. The kids, just a few hours, I almost begged. But my dad just waved his hand, his voice full of annoyance. We're retired. We deserve to live for ourselves. Don't drag us into your trouble, Rachel. And then the call ended. I stared at the dark screen, tears falling uncontrollably. Not because of the physical pain, but because I realized in their eyes, I and the fatherless children were just a burden. In that moment, I felt completely alone in the world. But then Nurse Sophie put her hand gently on my shoulder, her eyes full of sympathy. Rachel, I have a friend, Amanda. She's a nanny. She works with traumatized children. She can come tonight. I looked up at Sophie, and for the first time since Daniel died, I nodded, not because I was weak, but because I had made a decision. If the people who gave birth to me couldn't love me properly, then maybe it was time to stop trying to earn some of their love. I sat there on the hospital bed, my hands still shaking from the call. There was no longer a physical pain in my chest, but a huge void, as if someone had taken all the air out of the room. My parents, Margaret and Charles Bennett, the two people who had held my hand on my first day of school, who had cut my birthday cake when I turned 6, were now saying those cold, heart-wrenching words just because of a concert. We deserve to live. The words echoed in my head like a hollow echo. They said it even when I had to undergo emergency surgery, even when my 2-year-old grandchildren Leo and Liam were in danger of losing their mother on this cold Christmas night. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't believe it. But then, a deep part of me wasn't too surprised, because this wasn't the first time I had been put behind all other priorities in their hearts. Since childhood, I had been the shadow of my younger sister, Lily. I was always called the Wonder Girl, the pride of the family. When I got a scholarship to college, they asked, why didn't you do something more practical, like Lily is studying law? When I married Daniel, they complained that the wedding was too far away, too expensive. When I gave birth to the twins, they came to the hospital once, stayed for 30 minutes, and left because the kids were too loud. But I kept hoping, still tried to be a good daughter. After my parents retired early, a decision they made despite their financial woes, I started sending them $2,500 a month, without fail. I did it even after Daniel, the only man who had ever stood by me, died in a car accident. I kept sending money, still thinking that if I just did well enough, sacrificed enough, they would see me, acknowledge me, love me. But tonight, they gave me a clear answer. I was just a tool, a financial resource, a name to hold accountable, nothing more. And when I needed help the most, when my life was hanging in the balance, they put the Taylor Swift concert above all else. No questions about my health. No concern for the kids. Just annoyance that I was bothering them. I wiped my tears with my hospital gown, my heart choking with bitterness. But in that moment, something inside me changed. The last thread between me and them had snapped. And I knew that whether I made it through the night or not, I would no longer allow anyone to see me as a burden. The steady hum of a heart monitor filled the cold white hospital room. Rachel lay on her side, breathing shallow and trembling from the dull pain of her internal organs. Snow was falling on the roof of Seattle outside the window, and this Christmas there were no lights, no tree, no family greetings, just her own wheezing and the shadows of her twins sleeping on plastic chairs. The door to the room opened slightly, and Nurse Sophie entered with a sympathetic look. "Rachel," she said softly, "I have a friend named Amanda. She's a trauma caregiver. If you need me, I can call for help." Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, and when they opened them again, they were determined. "Call for me," she said softly. "I can't operate without knowing my kids are safe." Sophie nodded and walked out. As she waited, Rachel looked down at her hand, which was shaking from the floor, and whispered a silent prayer. She couldn't go on living like this. Always the backup plan. Always the one who reached out and got nothing in return. When Sophie turned and handed her the phone, Rachel knew the moment had come. Her hand touched the screen, no longer hesitating. The first message was to the bank, to cancel all recurring transfers to Margaret and Charles's accounts. For nearly 3 years, $2,500 had flown away every month as a habit labeled filial duty, and now the habit was over without further explanation. She composed the second message slowly, carefully, as if writing a will. "From today on, you and the children are no longer obligations. You and your parents have the right to live the life you choose, and so do I. Do not contact them again." She read it 3 times, pressed send, and then let go of the screen, as if she had just released a burden that had been weighing her down for too long. The moment the text was sent, a void opened in Rachel's chest, not of loss, but of space to breathe, to think, to start over. She turned to look at Leo and Liam, the 2 little creatures sleeping peacefully on their pillows, and for the first time in months, she felt like she had actually done the right thing. The first feeling wasn't pain nor regret, but freedom. Freedom from expectations, from roles, from the days of begging for a little affection in exchange for unconditional loyalty. Rachel closed her eyes, waiting for the surgery to begin, and there was only one thing on her mind: we'll be okay. No pity, no permission. When I opened my eyes, the soft white light of the ICU ceiling enveloped me like a faint mist. My throat was dry. My whole body was tired, but the steady heartbeat and the steady sound of the monitor in my ear told me that I was out of danger. Outside the window, snow was still falling silently, covering every eaves outside. But that peace didn't last long. Sophie handed me the phone, her eyes slightly worried. "I have dozens of missed calls and messages, mostly from my parents and sister." I nodded, my breathing still weak, but I was alert enough to turn on the phone. And then the coldness from the screen was what really chilled me. Not a single line of inquiry. Not a single "Are you okay? How was the surgery? How are the kids?" Instead, there were blunt, brazen sentences that poured ice cold into the heart of someone who had just returned from the brink of life and death. "Where's the transfer this week? We still have to pay for the Caribbean tour and the deposit for next month's cruise. Don't be so irresponsible. You're embarrassing us in front of our friends." I read each line, a numb feeling spreading through my chest. Could it be that really, after all I've done? I'm still just a walking wallet in their eyes. At that moment, there was a new message from Lily. She wrote, "Sis, what's going on? Mom and Dad said you were upset because of a checkup. I just found out you had to have an emergency surgery on Christmas Eve. Why did they hide it from me?" I texted back, my fingers shaking slightly. "Lily, it wasn't a checkup. It was emergency surgery. I had internal bleeding. I don't know if I'm going to live. I begged Mom and Dad to watch Leo and Liam during the surgery, but they refused because of the Taylor Swift concert tickets." A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Lily. Her voice on the other end was shaking with anger and regret. "You. I didn't know they lied to me. They made me think you were just exaggerating. I'm sorry. If I had known," I interrupted, gently but firmly. "I don't blame you. I know you're a victim of their narrative too. But you know now, and you have a choice in how you live your life." There was a thoughtful silence on the other end of the line. Then Lily sighed. "I want to be on your side. I'm tired of living according to their script. If you'll let me, I'll come visit the girls this week." I closed my eyes and a tear fell, not from sadness, but because for the first time, I didn't feel completely alone in my own family. The cold rain of late winter had barely stopped when a knock sounded on the door, loud and urgent, forcing Rachel to set her teacup down on the table. She walked to the door, peered through the peephole, and was not surprised to see Margaret and Charles, her real parents, standing outside in thick coats, with grim expressions that were anything but a conciliatory visit. They had not called, had not texted, and most of all, had brought no apology. Rachel opened the door just enough to see her father's stiff face. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm, his annoyance unconcealed. Without waiting for Rachel's invitation, they pushed the door open and entered the living room, as if they still had some claim to it. Margaret sank into a chair, pulled an envelope full of papers from her pocket, and her tone immediately became explanatory. "You can't just cut off the money like that. We're used to living like this. We have bills, loans, and a cruise booked." Rachel stood still, her eyes unblinking as she watched her mother speak, each word ringing like fingernails on glass. "Mom," she said slowly but clearly, "you have the right to plan your life, but I also have the right to decide not to be the one to fund it." Charles interrupted, tossing the papers on the table. "You're acting like an angry teenager. We didn't raise you to be treated like this." Rachel laughed, not out of humor, but because this old scenario had played out so many times in her life. "No, Dad," she replied. "You raised me to be a foil for Lily to shine. And I, as a child, have had to learn to live with less love, less recognition, and now less patience for unreasonable demands." She walked slowly to the table, sat across from them, and said firmly, "I was your daughter. I tried to please you. I closed my eyes and transferred money every month because I thought that was the right thing for children to do. But now I am the mother of 2 children, Leo and Liam, and I will not raise my children to suffer silently like their mother did. I will teach them to distinguish between love and manipulation, to say enough when necessary, and to know that anyone who does not respect their mother does not deserve to be in their lives." The air in the room was thick. Margaret pursed her lips, her eyes red, but not with guilt, but with anger. Charles stood up, pushed his chair back, and said menacingly, "You will regret it." Rachel just shrugged. "Maybe," she said, "but at least for the first time in my life, I chose to stand up for myself." And reaching out to open the door, she gestured them outside, no longer a child seeking approval, but a mother protecting her home. I stopped hearing the familiar ringing of my parents' phones. After our last encounter, I blocked them both, a painful but necessary decision. Lily was the exception. She still texted, occasionally called to check on Leo and Liam, brought them snacks or toys on weekends. I wasn't completely open, but I watched. And I hoped that my sister wasn't a carbon copy of my parents. 3 weeks later, late one afternoon, as I folded baby clothes in the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, Lily called. "Have you heard?" Her voice was strained. "Mom and Dad, they got a foreclosure notice from the bank. They defaulted on the side loan they took out to buy a yacht." I was silent for a moment. That asset had been their pride, a symbol of admirable retirement status, a reward for a carefree life, funded by my silence. "I'm not defending them," Lily continued, "but it's spreading to the relatives. And guess what they're doing?" I closed my eyes. "Blame you?" "Yeah," Lily confirmed. "Tell you to abandon them in their time of need, to get them into this. But this time, no one can swallow their words." The next line made me laugh, not out of amusement, but out of relief. Lily said that at a family dinner hosted by Aunt Evelyn, my dad began explaining that they were in trouble because Rachel didn't keep her promise of long-term support. His tone was as firm as if he were lecturing about betrayal. Everything seemed normal until Ryan, my cousin, Uncle Henry's son, inclined his head and asked innocently, "Didn't you just buy a new yacht last month? The big white one you showed off on Facebook?" The table fell silent. It was as if someone had turned off the background music from a show. My parents were speechless. Ryan didn't stop. "Oh, and that Maldives tour you booked in June? Or are you going to ask Rachel to pay for next year's vacation?" Lily said, and then no one defended her. Aunt Evelyn quietly got up to clean up, Uncle Henry sighed, and Grandma just shook her head. The truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs to be told at the right time. I hung up, put the phone down, and looked at the two sleeping children. In that moment, I didn't feel bitter. I just felt clear. For the first time in years, the truth was on my side, and I wasn't alone. I found the support group on a Tuesday evening, when Leo and Liam were both fast asleep. Sophie, the nurse who had stood by my side during surgery, sent the link to our first Zoom meeting. I sat in the dim yellow light, my heart still full of doubt, but then the faces appeared. Mothers like me, young widows, people struggling to raise children and learn to survive with half their hearts gone. One woman in the group had sun-bleached silver hair. Her name was Isabel. She spoke little, but her eyes were soft and understanding, as if they had seen through things I was just beginning to touch. After the meeting, Isabel sent me a private message. I'm a real estate agent. If you've ever thought about finding a new, quieter place for the kids, I have a few places I'd like to show you. I almost reflexively declined. Moving? Now. But then a few days later, as Leo sat in the corner of the small living room, banging his head against the wall because there wasn't enough room to run around, I remembered the offer, and I texted back. A week later, I was standing in front of a small house in the northern suburbs of Seattle. There was a lawn. There was a white picket fence. There was an old swing hanging from a maple tree in the back. Leo ran around like he'd found a treasure, and Liam was giggling. Isabel stood next to me and said, I was you once. And I know that sometimes change isn't just about surviving. It's about starting over where you deserve to be. I bought the house, using what little money I had left in my savings and a grant from a program for single women. A few weeks later, when everything was settled, I sat at my desk, scrolling through the memorial website I designed after Daniel's funeral. Every line, every image, every song, a way to hold on to him. And I wondered, how many people out there needed a way to remember their loved ones the way I did? The idea came as easily as breathing. I started a memorial website design service, simple, emotional, personal. My first client was an elderly woman who had just lost her husband to cancer. Then a mother who had lost her child in an accident. Each page I created was a farewell, but also a promise that memories don't disappear. They just take on another form, warm, beautiful, and everlasting. In the silence of my new home, amid the laughter of my two children and the thank you emails from strangers, I found what I thought I had lost forever with Daniel, a purpose to live. Not just for my children, for myself. One early fall morning, before the sun had time to dry the frost on the windowsill, I heard a knock on the door. It wasn't the hurried knock of a delivery man, nor the familiar knock of Lily or the neighbors. When I opened the door, all I saw was an envelope neatly placed on the carpet. No name, but in neat handwriting, Rachel. I recognized the handwriting. It was from my mother. I was about to ignore it, toss it in a drawer like so many old, unreadable notes. But this time, something made me stop. Maybe it was because the letter was handwritten, not a demand note, not a resentful email. I tore the edge off, my hand shaking slightly, my eyes scanning each line as if I were hallucinating. The letter was strangely honest. No blame, no beating around the bush, no mention of bills, loans, or destroyed plans. My mother told me about their new life, modest and small. My dad had gone back to work, the afternoon shift at the hardware store in town. Mom no longer had designer bags or concert tickets, but spent her time reading, cooking, and getting counseling at Lily's suggestion. You don't owe me anything, she wrote, but I owe you a lot. A real apology. A second chance if you'll let me. I folded the letter and sat silently by the window for a long time. There was a part of me that wanted to let go. But the other part, the part that had been shaking in bed, both physically in pain and mentally devastated, could not be forgotten. I didn't reply right away. It was 2 weeks later that I texted Lily, tell them, we can meet, but not to make up in tears. To set terms. The meeting took place at a coffee shop near my house. The space was quiet, the lights were soft, the smell of baked goods wafted in the air. When I walked in, Mom stood up immediately, her face worried, and Dad sat silently, clutching his teacup as if it were the only thing he had control over. No hugs, no tears. I sat down, looked straight at them, and said, "You want to see your grandchild? Good. But this time, let's be clear. Leo and Liam will only know grandparents who respect their mother. No sleight of hand, no demands, no hidden conditions. If you're really going to change, prove it. With actions, not words." Mom nodded, tears falling but not arguing. Dad said nothing, just nodded. The first nod I'd seen that wasn't arrogant, but acknowledging. I stood up, picked up my bag, and turned away. No promises. But I didn't close the door completely. Forgiveness, if it comes, will come from sincerity, not blood, but how people treat each other. And now, I'm strong enough to wait and see if they're worth it. Rachel stood by the living room window, where the gentle Seattle morning light poured in, bathing everything in a warm, golden glow. Leo and Liam were playing on the floor with blocks, their innocent laughter echoing like the heartbeat of their new home. Rachel smiled at the sight, a soft, peaceful, and profound smile. No more tears, no more waiting for a caring call or a compliment from those who once called her daughter. She had stopped playing that role long ago. Rachel was no longer the young girl who had craved her parents' approval, who would do anything for a few seconds of love, a few words of encouragement. Now she was a mother. Not perfect, but strong enough to protect her child. She had learned to set boundaries, something she had always felt guilty about doing. But motherhood had taught her that love did not come with unconditional sacrifice for those who did not deserve it. Love needs to be given properly and sometimes to oneself. When Rachel cut off her monthly financial support, she didn't just cancel a bank transaction. She ended a lifetime of toxic relationships. When she said no to demands and manipulation, she was saying yes to herself, to freedom, respect, and a healthy future for Leo and Liam. The boundaries she set weren't born out of anger, but out of love. Genuine love for two children who needed a mother who could teach them self-worth. She didn't choose the family she was born into, that Rachel had long accepted. But now, she knew that didn't define how she lived, and certainly not how she raised her children. Leo and Liam would grow up in a home where they were listened to, valued, and learned that love was never deserved. They would never have to wonder if they mattered. Rachel breathed slowly, her hand on her chest as she felt her heartbeat join the rhythm of her new life. She didn't need anyone to tell her she was doing the right thing. She knew she was on the right track. Every step, every decision, every limit, all of it was leading her to what was most precious, a life of her own choosing. And in the house filled with her children's laughter, with the calm after the storm, Rachel knew she had finally become the mother she needed as a child.